predicted. We've also seen major flooding in places like Collier County, Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach. You're also seeing inland flooding because of the inundation that you're seeing. So some of the counties in the interior of the state are seeing major water events as well. We do know that Lee, Hendry, and Glades 911 call centers are being rerouted. Those comms are down, so calls are being answered, and teams and the people that are calling are being noted, and then those local first responders will deploy as soon as it's safe to do so. Now, obviously, local responders can make decisions, but by and large, until the storm passes, they are not going to go into a situation for rescue and put their own folks at risk. And so we know that there are folks who are in the really high risk zone A evacuation zones who did not evacuate. Some have called in, and those people are being logged, and there will be a response, but it's likely going to take a little time for this storm to move forward so that it's safe for the first responders to be able to do. We are getting reports, but it's going to take a little bit more time to know exactly in terms of structural damage, but we are getting some reports of structural damage in both Lee and Charlotte counties, but I would say overwhelmingly, it's been that surge that has been the biggest issue and the flooding that has resulted as a result of that. In some areas, we think it's hit 12 feet. Now, it is our meteorologists' view that the storm surge has likely peaked and will likely be less in the coming hours than it has been up to this point. But we know that this has been a big storm, and it's done a lot of damage as it is. It is going to continue to move through the state of Florida. You're going to see hurricane force winds in places in central Florida, perhaps. It's clearly a very strong tropical storm all the way until it exits the Florida Peninsula in the Atlantic Ocean. There are, as much as we're focused on Southwest Florida, very important, obviously, when you have a storm of this nature. I think at landfall, it's going to be behind only the Labor Day hurricane, Hurricane Andrew, and Hurricane Michael in terms of intensity. I think we're going to end up seeing that. It may end up being a Category 5, but at a minimum, it's going to be a very strong Category 4 that's going to rank as one of the top 5 hurricanes to ever hit the Florida Peninsula. So that damage is ongoing. It's very, very important. But the fact is, there's going to be damage throughout the whole state, and people in other parts of the state, be prepared for some impacts. And you are seeing counties in different parts of the state issue evacuation orders. Clay County in Northeast Florida, which we do anticipate some major flooding events in Northeast Florida. I think folks that are familiar with the St. Johns River know that when you have weather like this, you will see this. And so Clay County has issued mandatory evacuations of low-lying areas along the St. Johns River. Flagler County has issued mandatory evacuations of its barrier islands, low-lying areas, and mobile homes. Nassau has issued evacuation orders for low-lying areas. St. Johns County is evacuating coastal and low-lying areas, including the city of St. Augustine, as well as the city of St. Augustine Beach. Putnam County has recommended evacuation for low-lying areas and areas that have a history of flooding, and Sumter County is advising evacuations of mobile homes. And so those are places that are hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the initial impact in Southwest Florida, and yet they are having to evacuate folks that are living in vulnerable areas. We have over 1.1 million reported power outages. Now, there are crews that are still working outside of Southwest Florida, but just understand that number is going to grow. You're going to see more power outages as this storm moves through the center part of our state and before it exits into the Atlantic coast. There are 100 portable cell phone towers ready to be deployed into Southwest Florida once it is safe to enter, and should that be needed. We want to make sure people are staying out of the way of emergency crews and out of floodwaters and away from all down power lines. As soon as emergency crews can get in, they are going to get in. As soon as it's safe to go and clear the roadways, Florida Department of Transportation is going to go in and clear those roadways. These are all on standby. They are ready to go. They understand the importance of a really, really quick response. As I mentioned earlier today, we have now officially sent the letter with the request to the Biden administration for a major disaster declaration for all 67 counties, requesting the federal government do 100% reimbursement up front for 60 days to ensure that we can quickly move forward into this response and recovery phase. And I know sometimes they wait till different damage assessments are made, but in this situation, you've got a massive Category 4 storm that you compare Charlie to this. This is way, way, way bigger than Charlie. It was as strong as Charlie coming in, but Charlie was much smaller. So this is a big one, and I think we all know there's going to be major impacts. We are, not only are there 42,000 linemen, they are positioned all across the state of Florida. As soon as it's safe to go, those personnel are going to go in to resume power, and that's something that's very, very important. In terms of rescue efforts, obviously there's robust efforts in each of these counties. I mean, some of these are major counties in our state, like Lee County, Collier County. They've got great response teams. The state of Florida, we are providing a lot of support that's staged and ready to go. We have almost 250 aircraft, more than 1,600 high water vehicles, and more than 300 boats of all drafts and sizes, including 250 already stationed in the major impacted areas, and nearly 50 that are staged and immediately ready to come in. And so with water this high, these operations may need to be waterborne operations. Now, there are some where you're going to need to use the water to get to some of the barrier islands anyways. But you look at like Collier County, I mean, downtown Naples is flooded. That's probably going to subside as the time goes on, but they're prepared for a lot of different eventualities. So we're thankful for the states that have sent us resources, and we're very, very appreciative of them stepping up and helping Florida. As this storm passes your community, understand it's still a very hazardous situation. You're going to have down power lines. You're going to have a possibility of harm's way because of standing water, misuse of generators. I asked the Department of Emergency Management, Kevin, to produce for me the rundown of the fatalities through direct impacts of storms versus the aftermath. And in Hurricane Irma, there were 7 fatalities directly because of the storm, and there were 77 that were a result of post-storm. And a lot of that is standing water, down power lines, misuse of generators. So please just take precaution. Obviously, a ferocious storm coming in, very hazardous, very ominous. We know the life-threatening nature of that. But once the storm goes, once there is apparent calm, there are still plenty of hazards out there. So just please make sure that you're taking the proper precautions. I'm happy that Volunteer Florida has now activated the Florida Disaster Fund. Sometimes people say, hey, we want to help. What can we do? And there's really two things you can do. One, send some donations, money. The other can be donate your time. What's not helpful is sending items and sending things to us. We have a lot of stuff pre-positioned. If there's a need for other stuff, Kevin and his team will work. FEMA, all these other groups can work to provide that. But if you provide money to some volunteer organizations and charity groups, they can make a big impact in people's lives. And if you're willing to volunteer your time, there's going to be ways you can be put to work, because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to need help on the back end of this thing. So if you want to contribute, you can go to floridadisasterfund.org or text disaster to 20222. For those who want to come and volunteer, we have an official volunteer portal at Volunteer Florida, www.volunteerflorida.org, to find volunteer opportunities. This storm is doing a number on the state of Florida. It is going to continue to move through this state today and through much of tomorrow. And there's going to continue to be a number of adverse effects. I can tell you that as soon as it moves beyond Southwest Florida, you're going to see a massive surge of personnel and supplies to be able to help those who are in need, get people back on their feet, and help to rebuild those communities. Kevin?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Governor. I think everybody should know that the governor is extremely committed to being involved in this response. And he was here with me till late last night, and he was here with me early this morning, and he has not been anywhere but very near me the entire time. So, Governor, thank you so much for your leadership in that area. I mean, it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the leadership. As the governor said, Hurricane Ian has made landfall this afternoon as a Category 4, winds of 155 miles an hour. I'm not going to read all the statistics that the governor's mentioned, but I'll bring a couple of new ones here. 1,100 resource requests have been we've received 1,100 resource requests. We have fulfilled 900 of those. Again, the difference of the 200 is stuff that we just cannot get out on the road right now. We're working as quickly as possible to address those needs. We have well over 200 shelters open. We have 42,000 restoration personnel. We literally have, with first responders across the state and additional ones coming in, there's well over 10,000 responders statewide ready to do stuff. As the storm makes its way across Florida, I remind Floridians to stay indoors if you're in the path of the storm. If you're sheltering in place path of the storm and you still have to fill out our shelter in place survey, we've had a lot of people answer that and give us that information. That helps us provide critical information to first responders about the demographics of your household so that they can aid your family as soon as possible. Please keep in mind that first responders may not be able to immediately enter impacted areas to assist you due to the safety hazards. I will say we are planning a 3-prong response to handle that specific issue. We have personnel staged to come in via ground, via vehicles. We have personnel staged to come in via air with aerial deployed search and rescue assets. And then we also have the Coast Guard and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission ready to come in by sea for those barrier islands and beachfront properties. So we will have a response mechanism that involves all 3 of those arms. Shelter in place survey, again, I just reiterate, is floridadisaster.org/info. If you need immediate assistance, please dial 911. That site is not a replacement for 911. If it is calm outside, you may be in the eye of the storm. As the eye of the storm continues to move inland, is getting ready to enter areas such as Hendry County, Glades County, do not go outside if all of a sudden the wind stops. In this situation, that means you're in the eye of the hurricane. Seek shelter immediately, get into an interior room, and protect yourself. Do not walk or drive through flooded areas. Floodwaters can stall your car and sweep you and your car away in the blink of an eye. We received reports of isolated tornadoes across east central Florida. If you're in a tornado warning, again, seek an interior room free of windows, get low, and put something over the top of your head to protect yourself. If a tornado warning, self-deployments. We do not want individuals self-deploying out on their own. That is very, very dangerous. Leave that to the professionals that are trained in how to do that. Do not take your personal boat out in these situations. We do not want to have to respond to yet another problem. The governor mentioned there are more deaths as a result of indirect situations than the actual direct situation of storm surge wind at the beginning of a storm. So please, what we want you to do more than anything else is stay safe. Please be careful out there. Again, Governor, thank you.
Do we have the Cajun Navy? They're on the way, right?
There are reports that they are on the way.
So I think the Cajun Navy is on the way, and okay, there we go. I mean, look, we really welcome. I mean, those are some really battle-hardened folks, and so Florida welcomes their support, and honestly, particularly Louisiana, because they've dealt with so much, and so the governor's been great. And look, we've got a long way to go before this storm exits the state, and there's going to be a lot of need to get into these communities, particularly in Southwest Florida, and offer the immediate assistance. But I do think the 3-pronged strategy, where you're going in by ground, air, and by sea, means that all hands are on deck, and there's going to be people that are going to be in harm's way. And what I've said is the folks were told in these areas of the hazards. They were given time to be able to make arrangements and to leave. Some chose not to do that. They would have probably been better off doing that. Nevertheless, if people are in harm's way, we're going to go and do whatever we can to help those folks. And so that is those operations are going to commence as soon as it's safe to do so. Certainly, I would say, no later than first thing in the morning?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no later, as soon as it's light outside and people are able to do it. And then it begins with the clearing the roads, making sure that the electrical folks can get in there. I was able to thank a number of these linemen. We went over to Lake City where a number of them are staged. These are great folks. They're coming from all across the country. I mean, I met people from Alabama, from Texas, from Louisiana. They're all coming to Florida. When we were driving back to Tallahassee from Lake City, I saw this beautiful sight of all these electrical vehicles coming where they had all the electrical equipment on. And these are folks that are going to help put people's power back on. It was just a procession of them. So we talked about 42,000. I'll bet you after today, there's probably going to be significantly even more. So you really are seeing just a great logistical effort to put all hands on deck in this response. Okay, any questions?
Yeah, Governor, you mentioned getting calls from people who have not evacuated, calls for help. About how many calls people were we talking about here?
Kevin, you want to take that?
So right now, I don't want to give you a solid number because it'd be a guess. I know earlier today we had the initial report was 21, and then we, because of the 911 issues in that Southwest Florida area, we had one small rural county that was answering calls for the larger county saying that they had hundreds of calls. So I can't really quantify that right now, but just go off the words that the emergency management directors at the local level told me.
Sorry. Yes.
Have you spoken to the president at all about getting that 100% coverage? I mean, has he? I know there's a lot of folks out there who are pushing for Florida to get that 100% coverage, but I know.
So when we spoke yesterday, I mean, he said, all hands on deck, that he wants to be helpful, and he said, ask whatever you need, ask us. He was inviting us to request support, and so that we think that this is probably the best thing that we can get at this juncture, given what we're dealing with, and so hopefully we'll get a favorable response on that.
Yeah. Mr. Guthrie mentioned this earlier, but this is obviously a big flooding event, and a lot of these places might not have flood insurance. Do you have a sense of, how exposed a lot of these people are who don't have coverage from flood insurance?
Not yet, but I think the issue is significant in the sense that these are not people that necessarily live in a quote flood zone. They live and they're asked, the realtor says, you're not in a flood zone. Well, they're not going to get the flood insurance. And I totally understand why people don't do that. But just because you're not in a quote flood zone does not mean that you're not at risk of a catastrophic event like this. And so I think you're going to see some clearly. How many, that remains to be seen. Now, there are programs that FEMA has to try to provide relief for people, but it is not going to be commensurate to having had a policy. And so this is an issue that we're going to have to deal with. But I do think it will be something, because we deal with this in other storms across the country, including Florida. When you have this about the homeowners policy will cover certain things, but the flood policy covers probably the most significant risk for most homeowners in Florida, given the risk of flooding that we have in so many different parts of our state. So we're sensitive to that. There's obviously going to be some folks that are going to be in need of support and relief, and we're obviously going to work as best we can. I will say that people have been asking about some of the overall homeowners insurance with like Citizens. Citizens, I think right now they're between $6 and $7 billion of surplus. They're modeling, based on paying out a lot of money in claims for this, was that they would still have between $4 and $5 billion in surplus, and so they view themselves as being able to weather this. Individual carriers, they have to go through a stress test to be able to have their policies approved, and so this year they had tested under a direct impact on Tampa Bay, then what would happen. And so they have policies, they have reinsurance, we have our RAP program, and of course the CAT fund. But for Citizens, they feel very strongly that they're going to be able to handle this and still have pretty significant reserves. Okay, thanks so much. I'll see you guys.